Welcome, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today. Hi, Dan. Hi, Preeti. Hi, Neeta. I see some people from the Coacharya team here in the webinar. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. As you're joining us, do let us know where in the world you're joining us from, and do make sure to select everyone whenever you're typing a comment or a question in the chat box so that everyone, including the panelists and the guests, can read your comments and your questions. Now, before we start today's session, I would like to invite you all to check out our upcoming programs. We have a mega level 1 program coming up. This will prepare you for the level 1 credential, which is the ACC credential. And why this is special is because this is being led by 3 master coaches, Cindy Muthukarapan, Ram Ramanathan, and Ujjwal Butch. And this is a huge opportunity to learn from 3 master trainers who bring decades of wisdom and experience in coaching. We also have a mega September month coming up with some interesting programs and combinations of trainers. And you will be learning from the best in the business with rich and diverse perspectives from trainers with different kinds of specializations. You can check out all our upcoming programs and our courses and our webinars calendar. I will be putting the link in the chat box shortly. Now, today's webinar is about coaching without borders, and we will be talking about mastering the art of cross-cultural coaching. We have a really diverse panel with us today, and I'm really excited about this panel. We have Claire with us, Claire Limbert. She is a seasoned leader with deep expertise in telecom, network planning, and operations, along with data analytics, financial modeling, and process optimization. She brings a strong track record of building and leading high-performing international teams. And in her current role at Colt, she leads Colt's extensive service delivery network teams, and she also drives performance and excellence across the organization. Welcome, Claire.
Thank you.
We also have John Ambrose with us today. John is a passionate and a results-oriented leader. He has extensive experience in building high-performance teams and fostering a culture of continuous learning and development. Now, in his current role, he provides strategic direction and leadership across all aspects of talent management, from attracting top talent to developing future leaders for Colt around the world. Welcome, John.
Thank you.
We also have Vineet with us, Vineet Aswani. Vineet is a strategic and future-focused talent management leader with global experience across talent and performance management, succession planning, coaching, L&D, and early careers. In his current role, he steers talent and performance management, transformation strategies that enable high performance, leadership impact, and business growth. Welcome, Vineet.
Thank you.
And we have, last but never the least, Smita. Smita is a coach, a leader, trainer, and facilitator. She holds the PCC and the ACTC credentials, and she's committed to coaching people to become their best selves. She also designs leadership development programs as part of her role at Coacharya and inspires people to be themselves. She will also be facilitating today's conversation. Welcome, Smita. With that, over to you. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you, Yamini. And a warm welcome to the panelists today. It's my pleasure and honor to be with you here today. I had the privilege of having John in my level 1 training program, and that's how I know John. And through John, I know all of you now. So, and welcome all the the attendees today. Thank you for tuning in. This webinar is for anybody and everybody who is, in some way or the other, having conversation with people with, diverse cultural background. So let's start. So we're talking about cultural diversity, and we know the importance of how diversity really helps in, creating exponential potential when it is properly harnessed, of course. And it requires leaders and coaches who can navigate across cultural boundaries. Workplaces, they are becoming increasingly diverse. However, leaders and coaches, we're still operating sometimes from a single cultural lens. So today, the guests from Colt will share how to bridge these cultural divides, and they are the leaders who are actually living in that field and leading international teams. So with that context, John, the first question is to you. The core of building any relationship is really about trust, competency. Can you name the competency or the number?
Oh wow. Okay. Yeah, you called me on the fly. Uh, uh, no, I don't know if I can, but maybe I can talk a little bit about trust more broadly, and the power of that, and how I think how it manifests differently in different cultures, right? Because and perhaps it's before I get to that, worth acknowledging that when we say different cultures, we often make generalizations. And so, for the benefit of this conversation, we perhaps make some generalizations that we should also remember are just this, they're generalizations. When we talk about the culture of a nation or a national identity, we're really thinking of it as a bell curve. And we're talking mostly about the middle of the bell curve. Of course, there is huge variance in any national culture, and there will be people that are more or less of any number of these different characteristics. But when we talk about it more generally, we're typically talking about the tip of the bell curve. I think the thing is that really my experience tells me that the best thing we can do is remain very curious and humble, to really listen to the other side, and perhaps it seems obvious, but to listen more than we speak, to not make assumptions that we know, or that it's the same as it is where we grew up or where we live. And I think in that listening, it's also to really pay attention to what matters to that person. And again, that may be partly about national culture. It could also be about the culture of the organization they belong to. It could be less. It could be more subtle than national. It could be regional, or more localized than that. And of course, their upbringing and their story and their life and everything else. And so we're all this kind of unique recipe of these inputs. That's not just about where we grew up. And then I think it's important to be clear with people about what your intentions are, and particularly in a coaching context, about how you're not there to judge or to fix anybody. I think somehow that can help to alleviate any anxiety that may come, to adapt, but try to stay authentic to who you are also, so to dial up or down your own characteristics without becoming someone else. And probably more important than anything else is to kind of remain open to ongoing and active feedback about how it's going, right? Because we won't be right first time every time, no matter how hard we try. The best way to develop that relationship, to build the trust, to make the most positive impact with somebody else, is to stay in tune to what do they need. We're not serving our agenda, we're serving theirs. And that means staying open to, is this working? Is it not working? What would make it better? What should we stop doing? How do we make small adjustments? And creating space and permission for that conversation, I think, is pretty crucial. Sorry, not the answer to your question, but perhaps an answer to a bigger question.
Yeah. No, I mean, you beautifully covered in terms of, what all will really help in building that trust. And in the ICF core competencies, when we're talking about the coaching mindset, you kind of covered all of those points, John, in your sharing with It's about being open or curious or client-centered or being flexible in our approach. And the wonderful word that you used there was about the assumptions. Like, I think as coaches and as leaders, the easy path is to make those assumptions. But how do we tune ourselves to manage those assumptions? It's not that those assumptions will not come, but how do we, in order to have that cohesiveness with the teams which come from a background of different cultures, how can we take care of our assumptions? So just expanding onto what all you shared, any since in Colt with your role, and since you have teams across varied cultures, is there any principle or approach that you have worked which has really worked for you well in this particular working system?
I'm going to try and use a real example that's perhaps a little anecdotal, but I think is a truism generally. So we have an operation in Japan, and kind of culturally, if you look at if you use any of these kind of diagnostics on culture, you would see that Japan would be often at the opposite end of a scale to lots of Western Europe. I grew up in the UK and have lots of British traits that are part of my upbringing. So when going there, firstly, I use a number of tools to remind myself about the differences. But then that also means in practice, I have to do things differently, right? So a very real example is if I want to run a group coaching facilitated kind of conversation, and the people in the room may be of mixed hierarchy or importance, that is very difficult to do on the fly. Because often, and again, I made my point about generalizations, but often somebody who grew up in a Japanese culture will find it difficult to say something in that kind of setting without first checking with their boss, especially if their boss is in the room. And so you are creating a scenario where you are not really setting anybody up in that room for success. In fact, many times people will just wait for the boss to speak so that they can agree with them. And so if you want to have that kind of conversation, you have to do way more work up front with individuals and by setting out the intent in advance and giving people time to think about it, so maybe they can talk among themselves offline, so that when you come to the conversation in the moment, there is already more thought happened and maybe even more consensus gathered before you get into the room. Otherwise, it becomes very difficult.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that example, and a real example from your experience. Dan has a comment there, and they cannot let their boss appear wrong or ignorant. Maybe may need to ask you to leave so that they can get their boss up to speed on an issue.
Yes, exactly that. Yeah. So it's about how to avoid losing face. This is very important.
Okay. Moving on, Vineet. So, the elephant in the room is really about the blind spots when we talk about the diversity. So, from your experience being in the L&D space, and again, managing teams across cultures, what kind of blind spots or misunderstandings, basically, do you see happening most often in coaching?
Interesting, and I think I can pick the thread from what was being discussed so far. One of the common blind spot I have seen is assuming that silence means agreement, and a lot of times this is very different in different cultures. So in some cultures, especially high context ones like say Japan or India, silence might indicate discomfort or disagreement, not necessarily consent. So, identifying some of these and calibrating at the early stage of coaching conversations really can help avoid this kind of misalignment. When I encounter situations like this, what I try and do is that instead of using simple check ins, I go slightly beyond that, where I try and ask things like, what in this resonates with you, or what might feel uncomfortable or unfamiliar. Of course, there are several cultural tools. I think we were talking about Erin Mayer's culture map when we were talking about this session. And internally, as an organization, we have something called as a Globe Smart tool that helps you get a little more cultural orientation. So I try and look at that tool before I get into a conversation with people with diverse cultures. I remember once I was coaching a leader from Southeast Asia, and there culturally they rarely push back or challenge you. So initially, I misread this as disengagement. But much later in the conversation, I realized that it was their culture, and hence they were trying to this they were doing this as a sign of respect rather than disengagement. So what I really then had to think about is, how do I do this differently? And what I used as a practice was that instead of countering this head on asking questions, I started to write down my reflections and send it to them in advance so that they had enough time to read through properly and be prepared with what they wanted to say. And that kind of created a more engaging conversation. And over a period of time, I realized that they started to open up and they started to build more trust, as the first question we were trying to address. And that warmth in the relationship came in, and then conversation started to flow more organically rather than more structured in this manner. But yeah, this is real life, what we've experienced in managing this situation.
Mhm. Okay, and this so well connects again to the space in coaching, which is about becoming comfortable with silence, and knowing that silence could mean different things for different people. But when it is about, when we are coaching, and allowing that space for the other person to become their best versions, this process of getting comfortable with silence can actually help evoking awareness in the other person.
Yeah. Actually, I remember in my coaching class when this topic was being discussed, I mentioned this to the group, saying that it's not silence, it's actually presence. So, so it may be understood or assumed as silence, but in that silence, there is presence that takes over. And that's very powerful when we are enabling people and giving them that space to be comfortable in how we are approaching the situation.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. Thank you. Uh, Now, with silence as one of the communication tool again, questioning and listening is the other part of communication. And when it is about adapting to different cultures, communication plays such a key role. So maybe John or Claire, whoever wants to answer this question, given that your experience is very, very rich in terms of leading high performance international teams. So when you're coaching people or leading people, if I can say that, who might be more indirect in how they communicate, they come from that background where it is about not speaking up really like very explicit, or come from culture with strong hierarchies, like John, you gave that example of Japan. So how do you adjust your communication style with those cultural background countries?
Yeah, I think it's something we have to be really mindful of in everything we talk about. So back to the, I mean, and actually it's not just a cultural thing, it's also the introverts versus the extroverts debate. And can you engage people in a conversation in the right way? So I think, in a coaching scenario, it's remembering that every single person is an individual, and really you almost need to have a contracting conversation at the beginning to try and get to know each other, to understand how the other person wants to work and how to help them get the most out of the situation that they're in, and really be very personal about how you do that. In a more general leadership context, it is more challenging. If I'm talking to my whole team that's across multiple countries, and there'll be different people will take information in different ways. I'm a big fan of Erin Mayer. I know we mentioned her before we started on the call. So I found the culture map really helpful just to kind of set the framework and think about, when I'm communicating to a broad audience, I try and make my communication as direct and as low context as I can, because actually that enables more people to engage with it and take from it. But it's also to make sure that it's as clear as possible to the broadest possible audience. If I'm in a one-to-one situation, then I can tailor my communication style more to the person, so to try and match the person more that I'm working with, so that, we both get more out of it. But I mean, one of the big things that I do is if I'm dealing in the sort of hierarchical situation that John was referring to in Japan before, then generally speaking, I will speak to leaders first, and I will tell them what my intention is in talking to the people within their teams. I was in Japan 3 weeks ago. I was doing skip levels with a number of my teams, and the managers weren't in the room. And, and that in itself shows an enormous amount of trust in me, because they didn't, we went in, I had explained exactly what I wanted to do, who I wanted to, and I wanted to give the people the floor, and I said that I would feed back any sort of issues, causes for concern, but it was going to be a free conversation, and that was actually really powerful. And I think that enabled the people in the room knew that their manager knew that they were there. They knew that they had permission to say whatever they wanted to say. They knew that the whole purpose was for me to understand better what they needed from me and how I could help them. So it was very clear, but that's enabled them to open up. So I think it's, it's about signaling intent, really understand, so people understand what you're trying to achieve, what the agenda is, what the results of the conversation are going to be, so that it can be open, so that it can be as honest as possible. And also to reward those people who are brave enough to speak up first, because once the first person has, the next person will feel more comfortable in following. And it is difficult. It can be difficult. It's easier, but it helps if you can actually, if you're having those sort of conversations, it helps if you can do it one-to-one or in small groups. But if you have to manage a larger context, then it's much more about very simple, direct messaging, repetition, making sure the message lands, and asking for a lot of feedback. Does this make sense to you? Can you play back what I just said? Do you feel comfortable with the message? Does this, do you agree? Or, and in some cases you ask for help. If you want people to, really engage with what you're saying, it's like, I need your help to understand this. Can you walk me through this? And then ask open-ended questions. And that can actually be really valuable as well, because it sort of gives people permission to express their opinions, as opposed to just, agreeing and going along. And as you've all said, silence is also, it's really important. It gives people a chance to reflect and to pause and to decide what they want to say and how they want to say it, if they want to say it.
Yeah, amazing. Claire, you brought up such authentic points as you were, I was deeply listening as to the points that you said in terms of what really helps to build that connect, starting with the intent and small little things about asking for help or asking about feedback. These are small little things, very subtle, but how it can really help in, bridging that divide that we are talking about right now. Yeah,
absolutely.
Amazing. Thank you. So for the audience, Vineet mentioned, Claire also mentioned, for any of you, if you're not aware of Erin Mayer, she's a professor at the INSEAD, and she's written this book called Culture Map. She's very, very active on LinkedIn. I've been following her for some time now, and every now and then we have some posts. I'm sure as leaders or as coaches, her posts will really help you. Yeah, if you're more keen on this subject of cultural diversity. All right. So moving ahead, coming again, Vineet, back to you. So how do you know if with all this that we're talking about, Claire gave some tips in terms of what she uses in order to help her to be a better leader and also understand her teams better. How do you know if cross-cultural coaching is really working? Like, are there any signs? Or feedback is something definitely which you can be very intentional and deliberate about. However, what do you think? How do you know that it is really working?
It's an interesting question because everything then has to have an outcome. Otherwise, why do we do all of this? So some of the signs that I look for in cross-cultural coaching is that when I see people navigating complexity with more curiosity than judgment. So it's like shifting or moving from reacting based on cultural assumptions to really pausing, asking questions, and adapting consciously, because that's a shift in mindset. It's quite subtle, but extremely powerful because it creates a ripple effect. And as a leader, with that, what happens is that sometimes you also see that those are leaders who are more sought after by colleagues from different regions. And they are the ones who are kind of showing or signaling to the behaviors that really resonate with most people. Some of the examples that I have seen are things around that the leaders or they start asking apparent questions during meetings like, how does this land in different cultures? So that actively being sensitive to the environment. Also, trying to look at involving more quieter team members, especially from high context cultures, more intentionally, so that which were previously probably assumed that they weren't engaged, are now brought into the conversation. So it's not just about a behavior shift, it is the shift in the language, it is the shift in how people include others. It's also a shift on how they reflect on culture dynamics. That, in many ways, tells us that it's not, reshaping, it's not just about reshaping their lenses, but it's also helping them change their actions more dynamically and realistically on the ground.
Great. And in the chat, you'll see Dan made a amazing comment. So you will see the aha moment in their eyes, which I think is very, very powerful. Seeing something they'd not noticed or thought before, and they bring you deeper, more personal. Thank you, Dan. That's a very, very good point. And for us to, observing that in the other person, like, most often, if we are really not looking into the eyes of the other, we will not even know that something really changed.
Yes.
I'm just scrolling here to see if there are any questions. Feel free to put your comments here as you're listening to the panelist. If some thought comes to you, or if you have a question, feel free to drop in here. Okay. So no other question, but I want to check John and Claire, based on what Vineet said right now in terms of how do we know if things are working? Is there anything else that you would like to add on?
I think there's I think for me that's quite contextual in terms of what is it we're checking is working, and what is our definition of working? So there's do we have the same understanding of what we're trying to do, or what the intent is? I think is probably a really good place to start. I think so often in the corporate life, where things break down is the misunderstanding is about what we actually are trying to do here, not about the way we're going about it. So I think there's something about, are we absolutely clear and aligned up front? It makes a massive difference to how likely we are to know whether it's working or not. Otherwise, I may think it's working and you may think it's not, but that's because we're after two different outcomes. So I think is critical that's clear at the beginning. And then I think from that point onwards, it's about that kind of regular check and ask and request the feedback. But most importantly, it's about how do you create an environment, a relationship where the other person can tell you if it's not working for them, that they have permission to both implicit and explicit to say this isn't doing it for me, right? Otherwise we bumble on from one meeting to the next, and before you know it, days turn into weeks and weeks turn into months, and everybody's expending their time, energy, and effort, and moving forwards. So I think there's something to be said for being and really listening. Really listening to the subtle indications that it's not working. They're not always explicit. Those are the things that come to mind.
Yeah. So what I'm really listening to is like, have you built that kind of a safety net so that I feel very safe to be saying I understand or I don't understand, and also am I able to listen to the other person from a very generative space? Yeah.
I just noticed something Dan said in the chat, if you don't mind me just acknowledging that, this point also about maybe when it's a new coaching relationship, starting on topics that may feel safer, that are maybe slightly more abstracted or about others and how you deal with others, and waiting to build the relationship to come to things that are perhaps more deep or potentially uncomfortable or more personal or about me. Establishing over time the relationship that allows you to lean into some of those conversations that may initially just be too much.
Okay. Yeah, Claire, you wanted to add something?
I would agree with that. Actually, I was sort of my recently moved into my current role 2 months ago from another sort of leadership team within Colt, and one of the first things that I wanted to do was to pause and to really build relationships with my team and to get to know them and to start to build trust, rather than, there's a lot of things that I want to do to help the team to be more successful, but I want them to understand that my intent behind that is to support them and to do things for the right reason. And to do that, I need them to have at least some level of confidence in me before we actually embark on that journey together. And it does need to be together. So, so as anxious as I am to get going and to do all the things that I have in mind, it's so important to take that, to take that moment and to actually build confidence, build relationships, build trust, and understand that also it doesn't happen overnight. It's a continuous process. But you have to start with the safe conversations and have people feel comfortable, and then at their own pace, you'll see people start to open up. And I think that's there is certainly a cultural aspect to that. It's how comfortable are people sharing? How do they choose to share? Again, it's something I know people who are quite comfortable to, talk about their personal life on the first time you ever have a conversation with them. I know people who would prefer never to talk about their personal life at work, but they have very strong career aspirations. And again, that can be, that can be a cultural difference as well. And I think it's so important to respect that and to listen and to understand why people are communicating in the way they are. And then, as a leader, you have the flexibility to adapt your style, or as a coach, you have the ability to adapt your style while remaining authentic. It can be much more difficult for other people to do the same. And it's my job to make sure that people have the right environment for them to be successful. So so that's very much the way I see it.
Yeah. Amazing. Yeah, I think few of these things are very top driven. So if the leaders in the organization can demonstrate this can easily percolate to the next level.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's by role model. You have to role model, and it's unreasonable to ask somebody else to do something that you aren't comfortable doing yourself as well. So you need to be willing to make yourself a bit vulnerable, so that to build that trust, to enable people to have the confidence to have the real conversations that they need to have.
So while you're on it, Claire, any real example from work when different cultural expectations about things like authority or decision making caused that tension in the team?
I think so. So we run a continuous improvement program within Colt. It was something we introduced a couple of years ago, and the intention behind it was to really promote growth mindsets, encourage empowerment, and to enable our people across organizations to identify those areas of the business where they felt that we weren't as efficient as we should be, or perhaps we were doing stuff that didn't add value, with a view to actually stopping doing some of the stuff that we had been doing, or to improve our processes to make us more efficient. When we first ran the pilot, what we found was actually we got global teams, and we hadn't considered the cultural impact of that sufficiently. So, first of all, just in a pure hierarchy, it's very difficult for somebody to tell their VP that they shouldn't do something. Sometimes, so there's a practical thing. It's like, even if you give people permission and you say you want people to be empowered, it's actually really quite a brave thing to do, to actually step out of their comfort zone and criticize something that their management chain have been accepting for a period of time. There was also, so that was a challenge that we had to think through, and how did we coach the leaders? And actually coaching the leaders was as important as coaching the people within the sort of working groups, as what does empowerment look like for your people, and and helping them to create an environment where their people could actually step up with their own ideas, and building trust at that level of the organization. So that the leaders who, in some of the more hierarchical cultures, who were used to directing as opposed to leading by consensus, they needed some support in allowing people to basically to defer some of their authority to their people, to allow them to step up. And the outcomes were fantastic, because we got some really creative ideas from people who were doing the jobs, who were close to the jobs, who really saw so what potential opportunities were. But in order to get to that and to create that sense where people felt comfortable in expressing themselves, took a considerable period of time just to change people's mindsets. But the reality is that, as a leader, if you can empower your people, then you achieve far more, because you have more ideas, more imagination, more innovation, and leaders are there, and teaching people, teaching managers that their role is to support their teams, not to drive them. Is actually quite, I think is a really positive outcome of that. But it requires support, it requires coaching, it requires repeated check-ins. It did push people out of their comfort zones, so we had to say why we thought it was valuable, and we also needed to track the results. so that we could demonstrate a tangible outcome. And I think it's not just a one and you've ticked the box and you've done it. It's something you have to live and breathe every day. And it's not easy for everybody, and it's not easy every day for everybody. But I think it is the better way to actually get a really strongly high-performing culture within an organization.
Beautiful.
Brilliant points, because and the onus of this is first with the leadership. Also because that in most cultures, people are not trained for confrontations or providing feedback to more senior leaders. Yeah, that's not a skill that is widely taught to people in any whether professional or personal situations, and that's why the onus then lies largely on the leaders to be so authentic in their vulnerability, which then will demonstrate and create more empowerment for people to come forward. So I love the response, Claire.
Yeah.
The
Something
same,
like reverse mentoring.
Absolutely. And actually that's something that I do as well. It's like I feel that, I have a number of mentees. I have, obviously mentors as well. I always learn more, I think, from my mentees than they learn from me, or it feels like that to me, just because it just gives me such a completely different frame of reference and understanding of their organization or their mindset, or so they're different, so there's a generational difference in some cases as well, and that's really helpful. So it's so powerful to get perspective from others. I think you can learn from everyone.
Absolutely. So Claire, just curious, is that your leadership, or it's Colt has that culture of reverse mentoring?
It's something that is within Colt, actually. It's something that I think I did by instinct, but without really having a name for it. But we actually have we do have reverse mentoring programs that exist within Colt. And we also have co-mentoring, where we bring different skills to more equal relationships, but we learn from one another. And actually a big part of that is around culture and around DEI, because it's so, as a, my frame of reference is unique to me. I've lived my life, but I'm working with, sort of over 1,000 people who've worked with, have different life experiences, all of them. And so, some of the, and to have the level of emotional intelligence where you're able to have the conversations that you need to have, you really do have to understand how other people have a better understanding about how other people see things, and some of the challenges that might not be obvious to you that might be really important to them. And the only way you find out about those if people are willing enough to share. And then you have to, if somebody gives you the gift of that kind of information, then it's your responsibility then to actually do something with that.
It's amazing that you're naming and calling that as a gift. John, you were adding something. Sorry, I think I interrupted.
Okay. Something else came to me as Claire was talking. I hope I won't embarrass you, Claire, but I think also the value you're deriving from those menteeship relationships also is about how you're going to them. It's about the spirit in which you go into those conversations to be humble and to discover, right? Because it would be easy for you to go there in the mindset of, I'm imparting my wisdom because I am the mentor. But actually you're going with a curiosity and an openness to, whatever comes up. And that's, that is also a testament to the way that you go into those conversations. The thing that was coming up for me, it's another book. People hopefully will forgive just endless book recommendations. There's a book called Turn This Ship Around by David Marquette. I see Claire nodding because she's heard me talk about this before. And this is it's a naval, a US Navy kind of example. But really the kind of, and I won't kind of talk about it for too long, but the crux of the story is that, leadership should mean giving control, not taking control. It should mean creating leaders, not forging followers. It's, the skill of great leadership is asking the people what to do because they know better than you do. Because they're in the work every day and they know how to do things, and it's their stuff that needs resolving or helping. And it's our job to get them unblocked, to help them get unstuck, to move things forward. And it was the thing that really resonated with me. There's a quote in this book where David Marquette says, I don't care how smart you are on the other submarine as the captain. You are not smarter than 195 people on my submarine. Right? So like 195 thinking, active, caring, proactive, driving, going after it people. It doesn't matter how smart you are, you're not smarter than 195 people, right? So the job is to harness the collective brain power. It's not to think it's all on you because you're in charge.
Thank you. Just so amazing. Thank you for typing in the name, Claire. Somebody was asking, Dominic was asking. Okay, so are there any questions? I'm scrolling just to check. Thank you, Vineet. Moving on, John. So, this is again about what kind of support or environment which can make it easy, for coaches. Nothing is easy, by the way. We're talking about, intention. We're talking about a hell lot of efforts that one needs to take in order to make all of this possible. However, what is it that can really support, in order to make coaching in this cross-cultural setting possible for you?
So I think there are some obvious tool type things that we've talked about. With this Globe Smart tool that's very, very useful. So I answer a few questions that kind of identifies my personal style that is distinct from their classic British person style. It's not exactly the same, but of course there is some intersection. And then I can put into that anywhere else in the world where I'm traveling or working with people, and it will give me recommendations for how to adjust my typical working practices to accommodate the fact that I'm working with people from another part of the world. So it's like the idea of the culture map book, but with some interactive element that gives you customized recommendations. By the way, I also am a big fan of the book, so it's I think that combination is helpful from a tooling perspective. I think the other things are about actually we haven't talked about this, but I think there's still something to be said for chemistry in the coaching relationship, right? So that how do you create an environment where actually someone doesn't have a coach foisted upon them as this is the coach you have now, but perhaps there is more of a process of meeting and checking and hearing from a few different coaches in order to pick the person that feels like the best fit for you. And I think providing variety in that process allows people to both find the coach that's most suitable for them and therefore perhaps put less load on the coach making big adjustments. Of course, not always possible for a whole variety of practical reasons, but I think where possible, it's really important. And then I think there's something about do all parties understand what we're doing and why we're doing it?
Mm-hmm.
So does the client, and in our case, often we're talking about someone internal. Does the client understand what coaching is for, or why they are benefiting from it, or have it available to them? That it is not corrective or punitive action, but does their boss understand what it's for and how to use it? Do those two people have the same understanding of what needs to be worked on? And if those things are untrue, if any of those three things are untrue, then the coach is set up for a difficult gig, irrespective of international cultures, right? Then lay over the top of that, I'm someone from a low context upbringing, potentially coaching someone from a high context upbringing, that's another layer of complication. If we don't have those fundamentals in place, then we are really setting ourselves up to fail. So I think it's, let's fix the basics, control the things we can control, and then that will leave us the headroom to deal with those more nuanced points that, really take active attention and a lot of thought.
Okay. So it's more about the contracting piece that we talk about in coaching. So setting that right with the stakeholders and with your actual client, which can be the internal leaders. Amazing. So Vineet, again, John is talking about as a coach and an internal coach, and as an HR, what should HR or leaders be doing? Anything more that you would want to add on there, Vineet?
I think he's covered the ground largely as a coach. Some of the other things that come to my mind are to create space for coaches to co-design engagements with local cultural inputs, because then that can enable the conversation a lot better than otherwise. Normalize conversations about these differences. It's not just about performance. Sometimes it's about how do you bring out those differences in the open and be able to speak about it openly and solve that together. It also could mean investing into that coach client matching beyond language, if you know what I say, which is considering personality and the worldview to see how does it really match, how does it really work for everyone in the ecosystem. These are some of the additional ways HR can get involved to influence some of these decisions.
So more like nurturing that environment where the coaching process can be successful.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Something else to add. Spitzer, I realized that a lot of our conversation has focused on, in most scenarios, we're talking about maybe a one-to-one relationship that is cross-cultural, or my example of I'm traveling to Japan and therefore I'm working with a room full of Japanese colleagues, right? But actually, we also have many situations where the room is completely mixed. Where there are 10 people in the room and they're from all corners of the world, right? And there's something also complicated about that that is worth acknowledging. And I think Claire's point earlier about being as clear as possible is very important. Again, also acknowledging that people are working in their second language. But the thing that I was thinking about was, again, in some cultures, it's appropriate and normalized to take quite a long pause after someone else has spoken in order to give space to that idea and to give it reverence and to be respectful. And certainly in Western Europe, there is barely a gap to breathe sometimes in meetings, because somebody is talking and the next person is talking and the next person is talking and the next person is talking. And if you're from the kind of environment where it is more normal to have long gaps in between, it may seem almost impossible to get into the conversation, because there is no space, right? It is just a constant wall of people talking. And not only is it that kind of element, but I think also for some people working in their second language, it's harder for them to read the cadence of people's speech, and therefore they don't know when the gap is coming. They can't quite read when someone is finished, and so, perhaps it would feel awfully rude to speak over or interrupt somebody, and therefore sometimes somebody who appears to be quiet in a meeting like that actually has lots to say. They just can't find a way to get a word in edgeways because people from other cultures are taking up all of the airtime.
I think, John, earlier, Claire mentioned this point, which really stuck with me, is about can all of it be, can there be an honest, open communication right at the start, deciding how the cadence would be, and that it has multiple cultural background people in there, and therefore you're simplifying. I know of cultural backgrounds where if after having a phone call, and some discussions or decisions being made on phone, if things go on email, in one country it is seen in one culture it's really seen and appreciated, but whereas in the other one they feel that they're not being trusted.
Yeah.
So I think the only way to handle is just to call it out, saying, in the room there are people with varied backgrounds, and we would really simplify things. Maybe in your context it's too simple, but understanding that it is quite diverse and varied, we're doing this. I think earlier Claire made that point and it really stuck with me.
And I think, yeah, so long as you explain the intent behind that, then I think everybody understands it, because you're right. Some people do, especially if they're working in a second language, they actually prefer to see things written down. Maybe they want to use transcripts for meetings as well as, or meeting minutes, or they want to see actions written down. But it also helps to check understanding, back to a point I think John made earlier. You can have a great conversation in a room and everybody can walk out with a slightly different idea of what we need to do next. And so it just makes sure that everybody is aligned. And it really only takes a couple of minutes to check for alignment, but the consequences could be enormous if you don't do that. And then people, sort of interpret things differently. And it's completely, and that comes back to the sort of high context and low context discussion again, and sort of, how much, variation is there in what people, between the intent between the speaker and then what people hear.
Great. Okay. So we have just a few minutes left, and Claire, the last question for you, if you can share, you've been sharing some, real example and stories, but any such real story where cultural misunderstanding almost disrupted the team dynamics?
I think disrupted is probably a strong word, and I hate to use another Japanese example because we have an absolutely amazing team in Japan, and so I don't want anybody to walk away with that idea if it's any different. But there's obviously there's a cultural difference in Japan, there's a time difference in Japan, there's a language difference in Japan, and what that sometimes means is that our Japanese teams aren't given the opportunity to have a voice at some of the tables they should really be at. And I've seen that sometimes translated as, oh, the Japanese business is different, the customer expectations are different, the cultural expectations are different, and therefore we can't do, that we have treat them separate, so that group of people separately from the global organization. And it is true that the culture is very different. It is true that the customer expectations are very different, but it's also true that the team are very much feel that they're part of a global organization, and they want to be part of a global organization, and they want their voices heard, and they want to understand how the rest of, sort of other parts of our business work, and they're not always given that opportunity. So I think, and that's I think that it was an unintentional consequence of people not having the opportunity to communicate as freely as they would have liked. But as a result, I think, so unless you actually break down those barriers, then you create this perception that this is a different business unit going its own way, when that's absolutely not either the corporate strategy or the intention of the people operating in that environment. And so, but I think it takes people taking time and understanding and trust to actually have those conversations to enable us to break those barriers down.
Great.
About how do we reduce to first principles, right? Like, how do we peel back all the noise and realize that broadly we're trying to do the same thing? It may just manifest in a slightly different way, and sometimes we lose sight of that. We, concoct a story that is too different when it's actually the same. And I think, Vinny, you said that the other day also, right? Even about the cultures thing. Yes, it's true that we all have different upbringings and different cultures and different backgrounds and all of that thing. Actually, when you peel all of that away, which obviously takes time and trust and all of those things, we're all still just kind of human beings trying to do our best. And there's something true about that in all of us.
I mean, I started way back in 2018, one of my first assignment, and that was the first time I was given a project to start coaching people sitting across different countries. And my mindset was that I can't coach somebody far away from me. I mean, coaching has to be face to face. It can't happen in an environment when it's virtual. But when I started that activity very openly to really see what happens, I realized what John just mentioned, that a few when you peel a few layers through a conversation, a trustworthy conversation, every human being is the same. And that's what enabled me to break my own mindset on this barrier, and then start to coach people in different countries, different places, virtually or face to face, whichever means were more applicable and appropriate.
Yeah, absolutely. And this would not have been possible if we didn't have the cross-cultural conversation here, would not have been possible if that was the barrier. Sorry, Claire.
Yeah, it was actually something that Dan said earlier in the chat, and it's and I can't quite find the comment, but what we shouldn't be doing is trying to force people to behave a certain way. We should be embracing the richness of all the different cultures that we have. We should be, that's when we see if people feel comfortable and they feel included as they are, then that's when we get the best from them. And so, I think all of the cultural diversity we have is a real gift. And, we should, so we should respect it. We should learn about it. We should embrace it. And that helps us be, better coaches, better leaders, better organizations.
Wow. Thank you so much, Claire, for beautifully summing it up, reframing from divide to embrace, and seeing this as a gift and an opportunity to learn. So with that, we are just crossed our time for today. Thank you so much, John, Claire, Vineet, for this wonderful, sharing. And I'm sure all the participants here would have got triggered in some way or the other, and they've got some inputs and insights from this conversation. Yeah, thank you so much. Really thank your time and all the contribution.